All right, everyone. It's your boy Blake. And today we had some big news. The special counsel's final report into Donald Trump, our incoming president, 47th president, um, and his interference into the 2020 election, the one that he lost, the one that he sent a mob to try to stop the count and certification of, and um, the one that he'll never face consequences about. Okay, so there's a few sections here. It's 127 pages in all. This is it's 174. Excuse me. This is just part one. Okay, it's two-part investigation. Jack Smith was charged with investigating this as well as the stolen documents at Mr. Trump's Mar-a-Lago home that he refused to turn over, that a warrant was executed on in his home, several documents recovered. That is section two. That probably won't be released. Why? Because the charges of that investigation, the charges that were born out of that investigation, were dropped. So, no accountability there. Here, this is the extent of the accountability that Mr. Trump will face into the January 6th insurrection of 2021. A day that, just as a quick aside, give you my thoughts, I watched this happen from start to finish, not only on that day, but President Trump's efforts starting before the election of 2020, after the election of 2020, to sow doubt because he wanted to have apparently a backup to stay in office if he did lose, which ended up happening. It was the worst day in American history that I've experienced as a nearly 40-year-old man. It was heartbreaking. It was something that I never thought I'd ever see in our great country. But like I said, being that Mr. Trump won the subsequent election after that, this most recent, he will not face any charges. This is going to be dropped, just like section or part two of this report, into the documents. So this is the extent of the accountability. Is the report of the special counsel, what he found, what he planned to charge, what a grand jury found evidence to charge Mr. Trump with, and all the evidence that they looked into. All right, so let's get into it. This is just really it's just a cover sheet. He summarizes here what he was set out to do. Pats on the back all around to his team. Some context into other investigations, similar. There's only been one investigation into a former president anywhere close to this in Watergate in the early 70s. So this is on a whole different scale, obviously. So we're going to skip this opening letter from Mr. Smith. And here we go. Final report on the special counsel's investigations and prosecutions, Volume 1, the election case. Reports on efforts to interfere with the lawful transfer of power following the 2020 presidential election or the certification of the Electoral College vote held on January 6, 2021. Mr. Smith, January 7th, 25. So this was put together, dated, delivered a week ago. Table of contents here. This first section looks like it's going to have the majority of the meat and potatoes. The law, we'll see how technical that gets. Principles of federal prosecution. Section 4 looks like it might be interesting. How they did the investigating. the challenges and litigation issues. So, in addition to making their argument here, they're going to predict Mr. Trump's defense, and I assume answer to those points. And let's get going. Volume 1, the election case. On November 18th, 2022, the Attorney General appointed the special counsel to oversee an ongoing investigation into whether any person or entity violated the law in connection with efforts to interfere with the lawful transfer of power. Following the 2020 presidential election or the certification of the Electoral College vote held on or about, exactly, January 6, 2021. As a result of that investigation, on August 1st, 2023, a federal grand jury in the District of Columbia charged DJT with four felony offenses arising from his efforts to unlawfully retain power by using fraud and deceit to overturn the 2020 election results. After the Supreme Court, in all their knowledge, held last summer that Mr. Trump was immune from prosecution for certain misuse of official power alleged in the indictment, a second grand jury found probable cause to return a superseding indictment, charging the same offenses based on his non-immunized conduct. Mr. Trump was thereafter reelected as President of the United States, and as a result, on November 25th, 24, after this most recent election, the special counsel moved to dismiss the case against Mr. Trump because of the Department of Justice's long-standing position that the Constitution forbids the federal indictment and prosecution of a sitting president. This volume focuses on the election case against Mr. Trump and, consistent with the applicable regulations, provides an explanation of the prosecution decisions reached by the special counsel. This first section of this volume sets forth a summary of key facts gleaned from the investigation, a vast majority of which are already a matter of public record through the litigation that occurred before the district court. The second section discusses the statutes that Mr. Trump was charged with violating, applying the facts developed during the investigation to the law as the special counsel's office understood it. This section also addresses other charges that the office considered but did not pursue, and defenses that the office expected Mr. Trump to raise at trial. The third section explains why the special counsel's decision to prosecute Mr. Trump was fully consistent with, and indeed was compelled by, the principles of federal prosecution. The fourth section describes the office's investigative procedures and policies. Finally, the fifth section of this volume discusses a series of investigative and prosecutive issues that the office confronted in the election case. The results of the investigation. In 2020, then President Donald J. Trump ran for re-election against Joseph R. Biden Jr. Mr. Trump lost. As alleged in the original and superseding indictments, substantial evidence demonstrates that Mr. Trump then engaged in an unprecedented criminal effort to overturn the legitimate results of the election in order to retain power. Although he did so primarily in his private capacity as a candidate, and with the assistance of multiple private co-conspirators, Mr. Trump also attempted to use the power and authority of the United States government in furtherance of his scheme. Yikes. As set forth in the original and superseding indictments, when it became clear that Mr. Trump had lost the election and that lawful means of challenging the election results had failed, he resorted to a series of criminal efforts to retain power. This included attempts to induce state officials to ignore true vote counts, to manufacture fraudulent slates of presidential electors in 7 states that he lost, to force Justice Department officials and his own Vice President, Michael Pence, to act in contravention of their oaths and to instead advance Mr. Trump's personal interests, and on January 6, 2021, to direct an angry mob to the United States Capitol to obstruct the congressional certification of the presidential election and then leverage rioters' violence to further delay it. Wow. It's also obvious, but seeing it in black and white is Still surprising. In service of these efforts, Mr. Trump worked with other people to achieve a common plan to overturn the election results and perpetuate himself in office. These individuals included co-conspirator 1, a private attorney who is willing to spread knowingly false claims and pursue strategies that Mr. Trump's campaign attorneys would not. Giuliani. Co-conspirator 2, a private attorney who devised and attempted to implement a strategy to leverage the vice president's ministerial role in the certification proceeding to obstruct the certification. What was that guy's name? Anyways, he was a John. It'll come to me. Co-conspirator 3, a private attorney whose unfounded claims of election fraud Mr. Trump privately acknowledged were crazy, but which he embraced and publicly amplified nonetheless. That's Stacey Powell. Co-conspirator 4, a Justice Department official who worked on civil matters and who, with Trump, attempted to use the Justice Department to open sham election crime investigations and influence state legislators with knowingly false claims of election fraud. Co-conspirator 5, a private attorney who assisted in devising and attempting to implement a plan to submit fraudulent slates of presidential electors to obstruct the certification process. And co-conspirator 6, a private political consultant who helped implement a plan to submit fraudulent slates of presidential electors to obstruct the certification proceeding. I wonder if that's... Oh, no, it's not a sitting consultant. Never mind. The through line of all of Mr. Trump's criminal efforts was deceit, knowingly false claims of election fraud. And the evidence shows that Mr. Trump used these lies as a weapon to defeat a federal government function foundational to the United States democratic process. Just a second, folks. I had to post it on YouTube. All right. Mr. Trump's false claims include dozens of specific claims regarding certain states, such as that large numbers of dead, non-resident, non-citizen, or otherwise ineligible voters had cast ballots, or that voting machines had changed votes for Mr. Trump to vote against him. These claims were demonstrably, and in many cases obviously, false. Obviously to some, maybe not so much to others. The office investigated whether Mr. Trump believed the claims he made. Evidence from a variety of sources established that Mr. Trump knew that there was no outcome determinative fraud in the 2020 election, that many of the specific claims he made were untrue, and that he had lost the election. He knew this because some of the highest-ranking officials in his own administration, including the vice president, told him directly that there was no evidence to support his claims. Mr. Trump's private advisors, both within and outside of his campaign, told him the same. On November 13th, his own campaign conceded its litigation in Arizona, a state pivotal to his re-election prospects. State officials and legislators whom Mr. Trump pressured to change vote tallies or stop certification of results rebuffed him and informed him that his fraud claims were wrong, both privately and through public statements. Mr. Trump also monitored legal developments regarding the election. It was on notice that state and federal courts rejected every post-election lawsuit that Mr. Trump and his allies filed claiming outcome determinative election fraud. Mr. Trump and co-conspirators could not have believed the specific fraud claims that they were making because the numbers they touted, for instance, of dead voters in a particular state, frequently vacillated wildly from day to day or were objectively impossible, including, for example, co-conspirator three's, I think that was Sidney Powell's, claim about voting machines that Mr. Trump privately acknowledged sounded crazy before he publicly amplified them. Finally, at times, Mr. Trump made comments implicitly acknowledging that he knew he had lost the election. For example, in a January 3rd, 2021 Oval Office meeting regarding a national security matter, Mr. Trump stated in part, quote, "It's too late for us. We're going to give that to the next guy," meaning President-elect Biden. This is 3 days before the insurrection. Mr. Trump aimed his deceit at the United States process of collecting, counting, and certifying votes, which flows from the Constitution and a federal law enacted in 1887 called the Electoral Count Act. The Constitution provides that the United States president is selected through the votes of individuals called electors, and that each state determines how to appoint its electors. What a great system. Through state laws, all 50 states and the District of Columbia have chosen to select electors based on the popular vote. Thank goodness. Therefore, after Election Day, pursuant to the Electoral Count Act, each state formally determines or ascertains its electors based on the popular vote. The ascertained electors meet on a day determined by the Electoral Count Act and cast their votes based on their state's popular vote. And the ascertained electors mail their electoral votes, along with a certification from the state executive that they are the state's legitimate electors to the United States Congress, to be counted and certified in an official proceeding. The Constitution and Electoral Count Act provide that on the 6th of January following Election Day, a fateful day, the Congress meets for that certification proceeding, which is presided over by the Vice President as President of the Senate. The legitimate electors' votes are opened and counted, and the winner is certified. That's it, folks. Until Mr. Trump obscured it, this democratic process had operated in a peaceful and orderly manner for more than 130 years. With a wrecking ball, he broke that all up. Mr. Trump's pressure on state officials. One of Mr. Trump's efforts to change the results of the election involved targeting the electoral process at the state level through politically aligned state officials. Mr. Trump contacted state legislators and executives, pressured them with false claims of election fraud in their states, and urged them to take action to ignore the vote counts and change the results. Significantly, he made election claims only to state legislators and executives who shared his political affiliation and were his political supporters, and only in states that he had lost. We're going to pause for a second, folks. Did that pause? I'm not so sure.